There are two fighter jets on the planet right now that define what air superiority actually means. One flies under the American flag, one flies under the Russian, and for the last 2 decades, defense ministries, military analysts, aviation engineers, and governments around the world have been asking the same question: which one wins? The F-22 Raptor, the Su-57 Felon, two machines built with the same goal: total domination of the sky, but separated by a gap that goes far deeper than most people realize. Not just in technology, not just in radar, not just in stealth, but in funding, in doctrine, in industrial capacity, in operational history, and in the fundamental philosophy of what it means to own the air. If you have ever wondered what the real performance gap between these two aircraft looks like, not the propaganda, not the marketing brochures, not the nationalistic cheerleading from either side, but the honest, detailed, technical truth, then stay with me. Because by the end of this, you will understand exactly where each jet stands, what each one does better, and what the real story is between Russia's most advanced fighter and America's most capable killing machine. Before we go any further, hit subscribe right now. Most people watching this will not subscribe, and they will miss every video we put out after this one. It is free, it takes 2 seconds, and it means you never miss a story like this one. Now let us get into it. To understand this comparison properly, you cannot just look at two aircraft side by side on a spec sheet. You have to understand the world that produced each of them, because these jets did not appear out of thin air. They are the product of decades of military thinking, of Cold War rivalry, of post-Cold War collapse, of industrial rebuilding, of geopolitical ambition, and of the most intense, most expensive engineering competition in human history. The story of the F-22 and the Su-57 is really the story of two civilizations trying to answer the same question in completely different ways. And the answers they came up with reveal everything. Let us start at the beginning. The F-22 Raptor did not begin as the F-22. It began as the Advanced Tactical Fighter Program, a United States Air Force initiative launched in 1981. 1981. Think about what that means. While Ronald Reagan was in the White House, while the Soviet Union still existed, while the Berlin Wall was still standing, American aerospace engineers were already working on the jet that would become the most capable air superiority fighter ever built. The ATF program was born out of a real fear. American military planners in the early 1980s were watching Soviet aviation technology advance at a rate that genuinely alarmed them. The MiG-29 and the Su-27 were entering Soviet service, and these were not primitive aircraft. They were serious fourth-generation fighters with serious capabilities. American planners looked at the trajectory of Soviet development and concluded that by the time a new American fighter entered service, it would need to be so far ahead of anything the Soviets could build that no realistic upgrade or improvement on the Soviet side could close the gap. That was the design philosophy from day one. Do not build a better version of what you already have. Build something so different, so advanced, so far beyond the current state of the art that the competition spends the next 30 years trying to catch up. Lockheed, what would become Lockheed Martin, and Northrop both submitted designs. In 1991, Lockheed's YF-22 was selected over Northrop's YF-23. And development continued through the 1990s, even as the Soviet Union collapsed, even as defense budgets were cut, even as some people inside the American government argued that with the Cold War over, the United States did not need the most expensive fighter ever built. Those arguments lost. The F-22 entered service in 2005. Now let us look at the Russian side. The Su-57 has a different origin story, and that origin story matters enormously when you try to understand where the jet stands today. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the Russian aerospace industry went through something close to a near-death experience. Design bureaus that had employed tens of thousands of engineers were suddenly operating with a fraction of their previous funding. Skilled engineers left the industry. Some left Russia entirely. Programs were canceled. Development timelines stretched. Prototypes sat in hangars waiting for money that did not come. The program that would eventually produce the Su-57 started in the early 1990s under the designation I-90, later evolving into the PAK-FA program, which stands for Perspektivny Aviacyjny Kompleks Frontowej Aviacji, or Prospective Airborne Complex of Frontline Aviation. Sukhoi was selected to develop the aircraft. The first flight of the prototype, designated T-50, happened in January 2010. That is 5 years after the F-22 was already in operational service with the United States Air Force. The Su-57 was officially adopted into Russian service in 2020. And here is where you need to pay very close attention, because this date matters more than almost anything else in this comparison. The Russian military officially accepted the Su-57 into service in 2020, but deliveries have been extraordinarily slow. As of the most recent available information, Russia has taken delivery of only a small handful of production standard Su-57s. The numbers vary depending on the source and the date of reporting, but the figure is somewhere between 10 and 20 aircraft, with production continuing at a very slow pace. Compare that to the F-22. The United States built 187 production F-22s before the program was controversially ended. 187 of the most advanced air superiority fighters ever built, fully operational, fully integrated into American air power doctrine, with years of operational experience, continuous upgrades, and a massive infrastructure of maintenance, training, and logistics surrounding them. The sheer scale difference between these two fleets is one of the most important factors in this entire comparison, and it is one that often gets glossed over in the breathless comparison videos and articles that treat this as if it is a fair fight between two roughly equal programs. It is not. Not today. But let us go deeper, because there is a lot more to understand here. Let us talk about stealth, because stealth is the defining characteristic of fifth-generation fighter aircraft, and it is where the gap between these two jets becomes most visible and most consequential. Stealth is not a single technology. It is a design philosophy that touches virtually every aspect of how a combat aircraft is built. It involves the shape of the airframe, the materials used in construction, the coatings applied to the surface, the placement and design of engine inlets, the internal storage of weapons, the design of the canopy, the management of heat signatures, and the electronic emissions the aircraft produces during operation. The F-22 was designed from the ground up, with stealth as a primary requirement, not an afterthought, not a secondary consideration, but a core design driver that influenced every single engineering decision made throughout the development program. The result is an aircraft with a radar cross-section that is estimated by various analysts to be somewhere in the range of 0.0001 square meters, roughly equivalent to a steel marble or a small bird. That is almost vanishingly small. For context, a conventional fourth-generation fighter like an F-15 or an Su-27 has a radar cross-section somewhere in the range of 10 to 15 square meters. The difference between those numbers is not incremental. It is not a modest improvement. It is a difference of several orders of magnitude. An Su-27 on radar looks like a large, obvious target. An F-22 on radar, if it appears at all, looks like a ghost. Now let us look at the Su-57's stealth characteristics, and here is where the analysis becomes genuinely interesting, because there is real disagreement in the expert community about how stealthy the Su-57 actually is. Sukhoi and the Russian military have claimed that the Su-57 is a genuine fifth-generation stealth aircraft comparable to the F-22 and F-35. Western analysts, and some independent technical experts who have examined publicly available information and imagery, have been more skeptical. The concerns fall into several specific areas. First, the Su-57's airframe shape. Stealth design requires extremely precise management of the angles at which surfaces meet. When radar waves hit an aircraft, the shape of the aircraft determines how those waves scatter and reflect back toward the radar receiver. The F-22's design is extraordinarily disciplined in this regard. Every surface is aligned with a small number of carefully chosen angles to ensure that radar energy is scattered away from the receiver rather than back toward it. When analysts examine publicly available images and footage of the Su-57, some have noted features of the airframe that appear less optimized for low observability than the F-22. The placement of certain panels, the design of the intake edges, and various other external features have led some analysts to suggest that the Su-57's stealth performance, particularly from certain angles, may not be as comprehensive as Russian claims suggest. Second, the question of internal weapons carriage. A true stealth fighter carries its weapons internally. The moment you hang a missile or a bomb on an external pylon, that weapon and its pylon create a massive radar return. The F-22 carries all of its weapons in internal bays, specifically a large main bay in the fuselage and two smaller side bays for short-range missiles. The Su-57 does have internal weapons bays. This is not in dispute. But the design and capacity of those bays has been a subject of ongoing discussion. There are questions about whether the Su-57's internal bays can carry the full range of Russian air-to-air missiles intended for the aircraft, or whether certain larger missiles must still be carried externally in a configuration that significantly compromises stealth. Third, the question of radar-absorbent materials and coatings. The F-22 uses extensive radar-absorbent materials applied with extraordinary precision across its surface. Russia has the capability to produce radar-absorbent materials, but maintaining the coatings that make a stealth aircraft stealthy in operational conditions is an extraordinarily demanding logistical challenge. The coatings are sensitive to weather, to maintenance activities, to humidity, to temperature extremes. Maintaining the stealth characteristics of an F-22 requires extensive hangar facilities, specialized maintenance equipment, and highly trained technicians working to extremely precise standards. Whether the Russian Air Force has built the full logistical and maintenance infrastructure needed to maintain the Su-57's stealth characteristics at the level claimed is an open question. Now, here is something important to say clearly. This analysis is not meant to dismiss the Su-57 as a worthless aircraft or Russian engineering as incapable. Russia has produced some of the most formidable conventional aircraft ever built. The Su-27 family has been continuously developed and refined over decades into genuinely excellent fighters. Russian missile technology, particularly air-to-air missiles, has historically been competitive with, and in some areas superior to Western equivalents. The point is not that Russia cannot build sophisticated aircraft. The point is that building a genuine fifth-generation stealth fighter is an extraordinarily difficult engineering challenge that pushes against the absolute frontier of what is industrially and technologically possible. And the evidence available suggests that on the stealth dimension specifically, the Su-57 is not in the same category as the F-22. Let us move to sensors and avionics, because in modern air combat, the jet that sees first kills first. The era of pure flying performance as the dominant factor in air combat largely ended with the missile age. What determines who survives in a modern beyond visual range engagement is who detects the other aircraft first, who locks on first, and who fires first. In that environment, the sensor suite of a fighter aircraft is arguably more important than its top speed or its turning radius. The F-22 carries the AN/ABG-77 active electronically scanned array radar. The ISA radar is a transformative technology. Unlike older mechanically scanned radars, which move a physical antenna to sweep the beam across space, an ISA radar uses hundreds or thousands of tiny individual transmit and receive modules that can be electronically directed to point anywhere within the radar's field of view, almost instantaneously. The advantages of ASA technology over older designs are numerous and significant. An ASA radar can rapidly change its operating frequency, which makes it much harder to detect and jam. It can simultaneously track multiple targets while also searching for new ones. It can function as an electronic warfare tool, directing its energy to detect or disrupt enemy systems. It can communicate data with other aircraft using low probability of intercept waveforms that are difficult for an enemy to detect or intercept. It can even be used to map terrain or detect ground targets. The AN/ABG-77 is widely considered one of the most capable airborne radars in the world. Its exact specifications are classified, but independent analysis suggests it has extremely long detection ranges, exceptional resistance to jamming, and sophisticated track-while scan capabilities that allow the F-22 to monitor a complex air environment while remaining extremely difficult to detect itself. The F-22 also carries a sophisticated electronic warfare suite and a range of other sensors. The aircraft can fuse data from multiple sources, its own radar, passive sensors, data received from other aircraft and ground stations through its intra-flight data link, and present the pilot with a comprehensive picture of the battle space. Now let us look at the Su-57's sensor suite. The Su-57 carries the N036 Bielka radar system, which includes multiple ACES antenna arrays. The Su-57 does not have a single radar antenna pointing forward. It has multiple antennas, providing coverage across a wider arc, including side-looking arrays in addition to the main forward-looking antenna. This is an interesting design choice that reflects Russian thinking about how air combat will evolve. The idea is that having radar coverage across a wider field of view gives the pilot situational awareness beyond the traditional forward arc of most fighter radars. The N036 Bielka is a genuine ACES system, which puts the Su-57 ahead of many fourth-generation fighters in terms of radar technology. The question is how it compares to the AN/APG-77. Here, honest analysis must acknowledge significant uncertainty. The detailed performance parameters of both radars are classified. Russian claims about the N036's capabilities are not independently verifiable. Western analysts have generally assessed that the AN/APG-77 maintains a performance advantage. particularly in terms of low probability of intercept operation and overall sensitivity, but the precise magnitude of that advantage is not something that can be stated with certainty from publicly available information. What can be said with more confidence is that the overall sensor fusion, data processing, and systems integration of the F-22 has been refined over years of operational experience, continuous upgrades, and extensive testing. The American Aerospace Industrial Base and the American military's investment in avionics and sensor technology is enormous, and that investment shows in the sophistication of the systems the F-22 carries. The Su-57's avionics have been subject to some critical reporting, including from Russian sources. There have been accounts suggesting that early production aircraft had software and systems integration challenges, and that the full capability of the Su-57 sensor suite has not yet been fully realized in operational aircraft. Some Russian commentary has acknowledged that the aircraft, while representing a significant step forward for Russian aviation, still has areas where capability is developing rather than fully mature. Now let us talk about engines, because the propulsion story of the Su-57 is one of the most important and least discussed aspects of this comparison. The F-22 is powered by two Pratt & Whitney F-119 PW100 turbofan engines. These are remarkable machines. Each one produces approximately 35,000 pounds of thrust with afterburner. But more importantly for the F-22's performance, they are designed to allow the aircraft to supercruise, meaning to fly at supersonic speeds without using afterburner. The F-22 can supercruise at approximately Mach 1.5. This is extraordinarily significant for several reasons. Afterburner dramatically increases fuel consumption, reducing range and endurance. An aircraft that can go supersonic without afterburner can cover ground at supersonic speed far more efficiently than an aircraft that requires afterburner to achieve supersonic flight. It also reduces the aircraft's infrared signature, because afterburner produces an intense heat signature that modern infrared search and track systems can detect at significant range. And it means the F-22 arrives at an engagement faster, with more fuel remaining for the fight, and with less warning given to an enemy with passive detection systems. The F-119 engines also provide the F-22 with two-dimensional thrust vectoring, meaning the engine nozzles can be directed up or down to augment the aircraft's pitch control. This gives the F-22 extraordinary agility at low speeds, allowing it to point its nose in directions and at rates that conventional fighters simply cannot match. Now here is the engine story of the Su-57, and this is where things get genuinely complicated. The Su-57 was originally intended to fly with an advanced engine designated the Product 30, which would give it supercruise capability and other performance characteristics comparable to what the F-119 delivers for the F-22. The problem is that the Product 30 engine has been in development for years and has faced significant delays. The aircraft that have been delivered to the Russian Air Force and the prototypes that have been flying are powered by the AL-41F1 engine, sometimes called the Item 17ES. This engine is an evolution of the engine used in the Su-35S, Russia's most advanced fourth-generation fighter. The AL-41F1 is a capable engine, and it does give the Su-57 significant performance, but it does not give the aircraft the supercruise capability that the Product 30 engine is intended to provide. This means that current Su-57s must use afterburner to achieve sustained supersonic flight, with all of the implications that carries for fuel consumption, range, and infrared signature. The Product 30 engine has reportedly been tested on at least one prototype, and Russian officials have indicated it will eventually be integrated into production aircraft. But the timeline for that integration remains uncertain, and until it happens, the Su-57 is flying with an engine that the aircraft was not ultimately designed around, and that represents a significant performance limitation compared to what was originally intended. Let us now talk about weapons, because an aircraft is ultimately a weapons delivery platform, and what it can carry and how it carries it determines what it can actually accomplish in combat. The F-22 carries a primary armament of 6 AIM-120 AMRAAM medium-range air-to-air missiles in its main internal weapons bay, along with 2 AIM-9 Sidewinder short-range missiles in its side bays. The AIM-120 AMRAAM is one of the world's most capable beyond visual range air-to-air missiles. It is active radar-guided, meaning it carries its own radar seeker and can guide itself to the target without continued support from the launching aircraft. This allows the launching pilot to take a defensive or evasive action after firing, rather than having to maintain a radar lock on the target. The AIM-120D, the most advanced production variant, has a range in excess of 100 miles, a sophisticated guidance system, and a track record in combat that has demonstrated its lethality. The F-22 also carries a 20mm M61A2 Vulcan cannon in its right-wing root for close-range engagements. For air-to-ground missions, the F-22 can carry a range of precision-guided munitions in its internal bays, though its air-to-ground capability is secondary to its primary air-to-air mission. The Su-57 is designed to carry a range of Russian air-to-air missiles, including the R-77 and its advanced variants, which are Russia's equivalent of the AMRAAM, and the R-74, a short-range missile. Russia has also developed the R-37M, a very long-range air-to-air missile with a reported range of well over 200 miles, which is intended to be carried by the Su-57 and used to target high-value assets like airborne early warning and control aircraft, tankers, and other large aircraft. The R-37M is a genuinely impressive missile on paper, and its range claims, if accurate, represent a meaningful capability. Russia has also been developing the K-77M, a ramjet-powered beyond visual range missile with active radar guidance and reportedly significant improvements over the baseline R-77. The weapons available to the Su-57, particularly the longer-range missiles, represent one area where Russia has invested heavily and where the capability gap with the United States is potentially narrower than it is in other areas. Russian air-to-air missile technology has historically been taken seriously by Western planners, and there is no reason to dismiss Russian advances in this area. However, the weapons are only as effective as the platform that carries them. A missile fired from an aircraft that has already been detected and engaged before it could bring its own weapons to bear is a missile that never gets fired. And this brings us back to the fundamental advantage that the F-22's stealth and sensor capabilities provide. The aircraft that is not detected is the aircraft that gets to fire first. The aircraft that gets to fire first wins. Let us talk now about pilot awareness, human factors, and the cockpit environment, because all of this technology ultimately has to interface with a human being sitting in a seat who has to make life or death decisions in fractions of a second. The F-22 cockpit was designed with an emphasis on presenting information to the pilot in an integrated, synthesized way. Rather than forcing the pilot to mentally fuse data from multiple individual instruments and displays, the F-22's systems process and correlate information from multiple sensors and present a unified picture of the battle space. The pilot does not just see radar returns and have to figure out what they mean. The aircraft systems sort through the available information, correlate it, identify threats, and present the pilot with a clear picture of what is out there and what needs to be done about it. This reduces cognitive load in an environment where cognitive load can kill you. A pilot who is mentally overwhelmed by the volume of information coming at him is a pilot who makes slower decisions, misses threats, and makes mistakes. The F-22's avionics philosophy is to handle as much of the information processing as possible so that the pilot can focus on the tactical decision-making. The F-22 also uses a voice throttle and stick, or HOTAS, system that allows the pilot to control most of the aircraft's critical systems without taking hands off the primary flight controls. This further reduces the time required to transition between tasks during high-speed, high-stakes maneuvering. The pilot wears a helmet-mounted cueing system that allows targeting of some weapons simply by looking at the target, removing even the need to point the aircraft's nose at the target in close-range engagements. The Su-57 cockpit has been described by Russian sources as similarly advanced, with large multifunction displays and a system designed to reduce pilot workload. Independent verification of exactly how well these systems perform in practice is difficult. What is known from Russian sources and from some limited publicly available information is that the Su-57 represents a significant step forward from the cockpit environments of earlier Russian fighters. Russian pilots who have transitioned from fourth-generation aircraft have reportedly expressed positive assessments of the Su-57's cockpit. But again, the gap between claim and independently verified performance is something that has to be acknowledged honestly. Let us now step back and look at something that does not get enough attention in most comparisons of these two aircraft. Let us talk about the support ecosystem, the training, the logistics, the infrastructure, and the operational experience that surrounds each of these jets. Because an aircraft does not fight alone, it fights as part of a system, and the system surrounding the F-22 is vastly more developed than the system surrounding the Su-57, and that difference has enormous operational implications. The F-22 operates as part of a mature, deeply integrated American air power system. It shares operational space with the E-3 Sentry airborne warning and control system, which provides long-range radar surveillance and battle management. It shares operational space with the E-8J Stars ground surveillance aircraft. It receives tanker support from the KC-135 and KC-46 tanker fleets, which have a combined size that dwarfs the tanker capabilities of any other nation on Earth. American tankers give F-22s the ability to extend their range dramatically, to remain on station for extended periods, and to project air power across distances that would otherwise be impossible. The F-22 also benefits from an extensive network of space-based assets. American military satellites provide communications, navigation, intelligence, and other support functions that multiply the effectiveness of every aircraft in the American inventory. The F-22 pilots who fly these aircraft are trained to an extraordinary standard. American pilots receive more flight hours than the pilots of virtually any other air force in the world. F-22 pilots are trained in complex, large-scale exercises that replicate the chaos and complexity of real combat as closely as possible. They train against sophisticated simulated threats, against aircraft representing adversary capabilities, and in scenarios designed to challenge them at the absolute limit of their capabilities. The American military culture of honest red team training, where the opposing force is allowed and encouraged to actually try to defeat you using the most sophisticated tactics available, has produced generations of pilots with a deep, experientially grounded understanding of what it actually takes to survive and win in modern air combat. The Russian Air Force has been working to improve the quality and quantity of pilot training in recent years, after a period following the Soviet collapse when flight hours were dramatically reduced due to fuel and budget constraints. But the legacy of that period is still being worked through, and the aggregate flying experience and training sophistication of Russian Air Force pilots is generally assessed to lag behind their American counterparts. The Su-57 fleet, with its small numbers and its still developing operational infrastructure, does not yet have the depth of operational experience, the established tactics and procedures, and the integrated support ecosystem that surrounds the F-22. Now let us address something that comes up constantly in discussions of these two aircraft, and that is the question of combat experience. The F-22 has been used in combat. The aircraft has conducted strikes in Syria, operating in the electromagnetic environment of a real war zone, coordinating with other American and coalition aircraft, managing real threats, and gathering real operational data that feeds back into how the aircraft is operated and how it is upgraded. The Su-57 has also been used in a combat environment in Syria. Russian officials have confirmed that Su-57s were deployed to Syria for what was described as testing in a real operational environment. The details of what was done during that deployment and what was learned from it are not publicly available. What was reported is that the aircraft were there for a limited period and were used in what appeared to be a limited operational role rather than sustained combat operations. The contrast in the scale and depth of combat operational experience between the F-22 fleet and the Su-57 fleet is another dimension of the gap between these two programs. Let us now talk about something that is genuinely uncomfortable for many people who approach this topic with a nationalistic perspective, and that is the question of what the Su-57 program actually reveals about the current state of Russian aerospace industrial capacity. Because the story of the Su-57's development, its delays, its engine issues, its slow production rate, and the gap between what was originally promised and what has been delivered is not just the story of one aircraft program. It is the story of an entire industrial ecosystem trying to accomplish an extraordinarily difficult engineering task with resources and infrastructure that were severely damaged by the collapse of the Soviet Union and have been slowly, unevenly rebuilt over the 3 decades since. Building a genuine fifth-generation fighter is not just an engineering challenge, it is a manufacturing challenge, a materials science challenge, a software engineering challenge, a systems integration challenge, and a logistics challenge all simultaneously. The United States had Lockheed Martin, Pratt & Whitney, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Raytheon, and dozens of other world-class aerospace companies working together on the F-22 program, with essentially unlimited access to the most advanced manufacturing technology in the world. Russia's aerospace industrial base, while it retains significant capability, has operated under resource constraints that have no equivalent in the American experience. The fact that Russia has produced the Su-57 at all, that it represents a genuine step into fifth-generation territory in some respects, is a meaningful engineering achievement. The problems the program has faced are real, but they should be understood in the context of what Russia's aerospace industry was working with. Now let us be equally honest about the limitations on the American side, because honesty requires looking at this from every angle. The F-22 program had its own serious problems. The aircraft is extraordinarily expensive to operate. Each flight hour costs roughly $68,000, which is among the highest of any aircraft in the American inventory. The oxygen system had issues that required extensive investigation and modification. The stealth coatings are maintenance-intensive and require sophisticated hangar facilities and technicians. The aircraft's communications architecture was a point of criticism for years, because the F-22's intra-flight data link could communicate with other F-22s, but initially could not directly receive and transmit on the Link 16 network used by other American and Allied aircraft, limiting its integration with the broader force. That limitation has been addressed through upgrades, but it illustrates the point that no aircraft program, regardless of how well funded and how carefully managed, is free from problems. The decision to end F-22 production at 187 aircraft is widely regarded by American air power experts as one of the most consequential and most debated procurement decisions in recent decades. The original program of record called for significantly more aircraft, with various estimates suggesting the Air Force wanted somewhere between 300 and 750 aircraft. The decision to end production was driven primarily by cost concerns and by the post-Cold War, post-9/11 prioritization of irregular warfare and counterinsurgency over high-end conventional conflict. From the perspective of the Air Force's ability to conduct high-end air superiority operations against a peer competitor, the decision to limit F-22 production is a serious structural limitation. 187 aircraft, minus those lost to accidents and attrition, are not enough to sustain high-intensity operations across multiple theaters simultaneously. This is a real gap, not in the capability of the individual aircraft, but in the overall capacity of the F-22 fleet. It is one of the reasons the F-35, despite being a different kind of aircraft oriented more toward multi-role capability than pure air superiority, has been produced in much larger numbers and is intended to complement the F-22 in high-end scenarios. Let us now do a direct comparison of the performance parameters that most people want to know about when they compare these two fighters, with the caveat that many of the exact figures for both aircraft are classified, and that publicly available numbers should be understood as estimates rather than verified facts. In terms of top speed, the F-22 is officially credited with a maximum speed of Mach 2.25, though the actual top speed may be higher. The Su-57 is claimed to have a top speed of approximately Mach 2. Both aircraft are therefore in a similar range for top speed with afterburner, though the F-22's supercruise capability gives it a significant advantage in operational terms, as discussed earlier. In terms of maneuverability, both aircraft are exceptionally agile. The F-22 has two-dimensional thrust vectoring. The Su-57 has three-dimensional thrust vectoring, meaning its engine nozzles can be directed both up and down and side to side, giving it the ability to perform some maneuvers that are not possible with two-dimensional thrust vectoring. In close-range visual range combat, the Su-57's three-dimensional thrust vectoring could potentially provide a maneuvering advantage. However, the entire design philosophy of both fifth-generation fighters is oriented toward ensuring that visual range combat never happens, that the battle is won at long range, before the two aircraft ever see each other. If both aircraft were doing their jobs properly, the question of three-dimensional versus two-dimensional thrust vectoring would never come up, because one of the aircraft would have been destroyed before it got within visual range. The extreme agility of both aircraft at close range is therefore something of an academic question from a doctrinal standpoint, even if it is fascinating from an engineering and aviation standpoint. In terms of combat radius, the F-22 has an estimated combat radius of approximately 500 miles, which is respectable for a fighter aircraft. The Su-57 is estimated to have a combat radius in a similar range, though Russian claims about specific performance figures have not been independently verified. Both aircraft can have their range significantly extended through aerial refueling. In terms of payload, the F-22 carries 6 AMRAAM missiles and 2 Sidewinders in its internal bays in the primary air-to-air configuration, as well as having the ability to carry additional weapons on external pylons at the cost of stealth. The Su-57's internal weapons capacity is a subject of some discussion, with questions about exactly how many and which missiles can be carried fully internally, as discussed earlier. Now let us step back even further and look at this comparison at the strategic level, because the individual capabilities of these two aircraft, while important, do not exist in isolation. They exist in the context of broader military and geopolitical realities that shape how and whether these aircraft would ever actually be used against each other. The United States Air Force, in a high-end conventional conflict against Russia or any other peer competitor, would not be relying solely on F-22s. The American force would include F-35s in significant numbers, continuing to be produced and deployed. It would include long-range strike assets, electronic warfare aircraft, space-based capabilities, and a complete joint warfighting architecture that integrates air, land, sea, space, and cyber capabilities in ways that are genuinely unprecedented in military history. Russia's military, while formidable in important respects and while having demonstrated real capability in certain operational environments, does not yet possess an equivalent degree of joint force integration. Russian air defense, electronic warfare, and long-range missile capabilities are real and serious, and they would complicate any American air operation against Russia enormously. But the overall capability balance, when considered holistically rather than aircraft against aircraft, heavily favors the United States in terms of high-end conventional air power. The Su-57 is not Russia's only answer to the F-22. Russia's strategic response to American air power has never been primarily about matching American aircraft to aircraft in the sky. Russia has invested enormously in ground-based air defense systems, in electronic warfare, in anti-satellite capabilities, and in other tools designed to limit American air power without having to win a straight-up fighter-to-fighter engagement. The S-400 and now S-500 air defense systems, Russian electronic warfare equipment, and Russia's approach to anti-access and area denial represent a different kind of response to American air superiority than trying to build an aircraft that matches the F-22 in the sky. Whether that approach is ultimately more or less effective than trying to match America aircraft for aircraft is a question that military strategists debate seriously, but it is important to understand the Su-57 in this context. Russia was never trying to build a fleet of hundreds of Su-57s to directly challenge American air superiority on the same terms America uses to establish it. The Su-57 is intended to be a high-end element of a broader Russian approach to air power that combines advanced fighters with sophisticated ground-based systems, electronic warfare, and other capabilities. Let us talk about the future trajectory of both programs, because where these aircraft are going matters as much as where they are today. The F-22, despite not being in current production, is the subject of ongoing upgrades. The Increment 3.2B and subsequent upgrade programs have added and continue to add capabilities across sensors, electronic warfare, and weapons integration. The Air Force has been working on integrating new weapons, improving the aircraft's ability to operate as part of a networked force, and addressing some of the aircraft's long-standing limitations. There are also discussions about the aircraft's eventual replacement. The Next Generation Air Dominance Program, or NAID, is the American effort to define and develop the successor to the F-22. The details of that program are largely classified, but the intent is clear. Develop an air dominance platform for the 2030s and beyond that addresses the evolving threat environment. The Su-57 program is also continuing to develop. The integration of the Product 30 engine, if and when it is completed, would represent a significant improvement in the aircraft's performance. Continued software and avionics development may address some of the integration and capability maturity issues that have been identified. Russia has also been discussing the development of its own next-generation aircraft, sometimes referred to as the Checkmate or the Su-75, a lighter single-engine fighter that appears intended for export markets as well as Russian service, and potentially other programs. The trajectory of Russian aerospace development will depend heavily on Russia's economic and industrial situation, which has been significantly affected by Western sanctions and by the economic consequences of the war in Ukraine. Let us now bring this to the level that matters most, the individual pilot who would have to fly one of these aircraft in a real combat scenario against the other. Imagine for a moment an F-22 pilot and an Su-57 pilot in the same airspace, unknown to each other, each representing the full capability of their aircraft and their training. How does that engagement actually unfold? The F-22 pilot, operating with the AN/APG-77 radar in low probability of intercept mode, would be scanning the airspace ahead. The radar's emissions are carefully managed to minimize the chance that the Su-57's radar warning receiver detects that it is being illuminated. At the same time, the F-22's passive systems are monitoring the electromagnetic environment for any emissions from the Su-57, including its radar, its communications, and any other electronic signatures. If the Su-57 is operating its own radar at full power, those emissions could be detected by the F-22 systems at significant range, potentially before the Su-57's radar detects the F-22. If the Su-57's radar cross-section is as large as some Western analysts suggest it might be relative to the F-22, the F-22's APG-77 might detect the Su-57 at a significant range advantage. The F-22 could achieve a firing solution on the Su-57 before the Su-57 knows the F-22 is there. The F-22 fires. The AMRAAM guides independently. The F-22 turns away or maneuvers, further reducing its already tiny radar cross-section, and waits. This scenario, where one aircraft kills the other without the second aircraft ever knowing it was in a fight, is called a non-cooperative kill. It represents the ultimate expression of fifth-generation air power. And the F-22 was designed, from its first conceptual lines on paper in 1981, to achieve exactly this kind of engagement. Now, of course, real combat is not clean. Real combat involves electronic warfare, decoys, multiple aircraft, ground-based radar, data links, and 1,000 other variables that complicate any simple one-on-one analysis. The Su-57 would be operating as part of a broader force that includes ground-based radars, airborne early warning aircraft, and other sensors that collectively provide a much more complete picture of the airspace than any single aircraft can generate on its own. The F-22 would face the same complexity from the American side, with AWACS aircraft, space-based sensors, and a networked picture of the battlespace feeding information to the pilot. The bottom line on a one-on-one basis, based on everything that is publicly known, is that the F-22 holds a very substantial advantage in stealth, a meaningful advantage in sensor capability and avionics maturity, an advantage in supercruise performance, and a very large advantage in fleet size, operational experience, and supporting infrastructure. The Su-57 has genuine capabilities. Its three-dimensional thrust vectoring, its wide-angle radar coverage, its intended weapons suite, and its pilot cockpit design represent real engineering achievements. But the gap between the two aircraft in the areas that matter most in modern air combat is not a small gap. It is a substantial one that reflects decades of difference in investment, industrial capacity, and program maturity.